Chapter 1805. Shangwan Linglan couldn't sit still after hearing Jing Yu's voice. After hearing the sound of the door closing, she didn't even think about it before lifting the embroidered handkerchief. Jing Yu, you're finally here. When Shangwan Linglan saw Jing Yu, it was as if she saw her own mother. Her face was full of tears. Why are you still afraid that the veil will be lifted? Jing Yu glared at Shangwan Linglan. She took out the snacks hidden in her sleeves and said, "Are you hungry? Look at what I brought for you." Jing Yu, you really know me too well. When Shangwan Linglan saw the food, her eyes lit up. She quickly took it and began to eat. While eating, she said, "This marriage is really too torturous. My mother nagged me the whole night last night. She said that you have to do what you have to do after marrying into someone else's family. I didn't sleep for a while in the morning, and I was pulled up. I was so hungry that I haven't eaten anything yet." Shangwan Linglan swallowed the food in her mouth and said, "And how many layers of clothes are you wearing? I'm going crazy from the heat, and there's this on my head. The nanny said that I have to sit here until night. Shangwan Linglan was almost crying. Poochie. Jing Yu looked like she understood Shangwan Linglan very well. She sighed deeply and said, "Miao Qiu and I have been through this. You just have to bear with it. If the person I'm marrying wasn't Xing'er, I would have run away." Shangwan Linglan fiercely bit the food with a face full of unhappiness. "It's a happy day. Can't you say something good?" Jing Yu glared at Shangwan Linglan and said, "I can't stay here for long. Hurry up and eat. After eating, cover your head. If you don't eat something, you won't be able to last until night." What do you want to do at night?" Shangwan Linglan asked curiously when he heard Jing Yu's words. "Your mother must have warned you." Jing Yu winked at Shangwan Linglan, then stood up and said, "Be good and stay here. Don't think about running away. Otherwise, I'll have to look for you all over the world." All right, I got it." Shangwan Linglan glared at Jing Yu with dissatisfaction. After watching Jing Yu leave, he quietly finished his food, tidied up his clothes, and covered himself with the embroidered handkerchief again. When he thought about what Jing Yu said about tonight, he suddenly became nervous. His mother only told him vaguely, but Shangwan Linglan didn't know what to do. Shangwan Linglan waited anxiously. However, he waited for too long. It was so long that Shangwan Linglan almost fell asleep. Then he heard a loud voice from outside. "This servant greets the general." The voice was so loud that it was obviously to remind Shangwan Linglan that the main character was here. Shangwan Linglan immediately sat up straight and obediently sat on his seat. Then he saw a large group of maidservants and nannies walking in. They sprinkled longan and red dates on the bed and said some auspicious words. Then they tidied up everything and served Shangwan Linglan and Xing'er until they finished drinking the wine. Then they left in a single file. When there were so many people in the room, Shangwan Linglan didn't feel anything. However, when she suddenly felt that the room had quieted down, her entire body stiffened and her breathing became cautious. Chapter 1806. His eyes darted around as he saw a pair of dark red boots standing in front of him. A pair of mandarin ducks slowly stretched out and lifted the embroidered handkerchief on Shangwan Linglan's head, revealing Shangwan Linglan's incomparably exquisite face. Xing'er looked at Shangwan Linglan, and Shanghai Linglan also raised her head slightly to look at Xing'er. There was a faint shyness in her clear black and white eyes. This was the first time that Xing'er had seen Shangwan Linglan dressed so beautifully. "Why do you keep staring at me?" Shangwan Linglan's face instantly turned red when Xing'er stared at her. She lowered her head slightly and said, "I've imagined this scene many times, but it's never been as real as this time." Xing'er reached out slightly and touched Shangwan Linglan's cheeks. That gentle touch made Xing'er and Shanghai Linglan tremble uncontrollably. A very strange feeling spread through the hearts of the two. Xing'er reached out and helped Shangwan Linglan stand up. He reached out to remove the headband on Shangwan Linglan's head and pursed his lips slightly. Looking at Shanghai Linglan's loose hair, the gentleness in his eyes was so moving. "Is it tiring to hold it down?" Xing'er pursed his lips slightly and looked at Shangwan Linglan as he spoke. "Tiring? Shangwan Linglan suddenly felt a sense of relief when the headband was removed. She looked up at Xing Er, who was dressed in red, and said, "Your clothes really suit you. Your clothes also suit you very well." Xing Er raised his eyebrows slightly and replied, "Stop talking. Look at how many clothes I've worn. It's so hot." Shangwan Linglan's face was full of unhappiness. Xing Er frowned slightly and said, "You know it's hot, but you don't know how to take it off." Shangwan Linglan looked at Xing Er reaching out to take off her clothes. Her body trembled slightly, and she took a step back reflexively. Xing Er's hand suddenly froze in midair. Shanghai Linglan looked up at Xing Er. She pursed her lips tightly, as if she knew what she was doing was wrong. She lowered her head and took another step forward. She said softly, "I didn't do it on purpose." A soft chuckle came from Second Xing's mouth. Shangwan Linglan thought she had heard wrongly and raised her head to look at Second Xing. Seeing Second Xing's incomparably bright smile, she was instantly stunned on the spot, her eyes filled with astonishment. You smiled." This scene was simply too scary for Shangwan Linglan. "I'm very happy." Xing Er reached out and hugged Shangwan Linglan tightly. That familiar yet strange feeling made Shangwan Linglan's heart tremble violently. Her slightly stiff body softened in Xing Er's embrace. "Do you regret marrying me?" Xing Er lowered his eyes slightly and asked Shangwan Linglan in her ear. "I'm already married. It's too late to regret." Shangwan Linglan muttered unhappily. "You really dare to regret it." When Xing Er heard Shangwan Linglan's words, his expression suddenly changed. He stretched out his hand and put some distance between the two of them. A pair of pitch-black eyes stared intently at Shangwan Linglan. The expression in those black eyes made Shangwan Linglan's heart tremble. I was just saying," Shangwan Linglan replied with a slightly embarrassed expression. "It looks like I need to make you give up on this idea," Xing Er said seriously as he stared at Shangwan Linglan. Chapter 1807. Xiao Chen responded again. "Oh my God, why do I feel like I'm dreaming?" Jingyu looked at Xiao Chen in shock. Xiao Chen chuckled when he heard Jingyu's words. He reached out and hugged Jingyu in his arms. He closed his eyes and said, "Don't think about it. Dream again and you'll give birth to the child." Jingyu didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she heard Xiao Chen's words. She poked Xiao Chen's chest and buried her head in Xiao Chen's arms. She sighed and said, "Time flies. In the blink of an eye, the three of us are married." Xiao Chen hugged Jingyu tightly and said, "Do you have any unfulfilled wishes?" "Of course it's to go to the Roman forest." Jingyu got angry when she said this. She reached out and grabbed Xiao Chen's face. She stared at Xiao Chen fiercely and said, "Speaking of which, I haven't settled the score with you yet. Are you going to return Silver Arrow and Silver Wind to me or not? You even said that Silver Arrow and Silver Wind were in the palace." "You liar," Jingyu said angrily and pulled Xiao Chen's face fiercely. Hiss! Xiao Chen sucked in a breath of cold air and quickly restrained Jingyu's hands. He said, "You're pregnant now. I can't let you be with Silver Arrow and Silver Wind. What if these two big guys bump into you? Where are my Silver Arrow and Silver Wind?" Jingyu stared at Xiao Chen angrily and said through gritted teeth, "They're in the forest. You didn't bring them back, did you?" "Ahem." Xiao Chen coughed slightly and said seriously, "This is a serious matter. We'll talk about it later." Jingyu instantly went berserk. She glared fiercely at Xiao Chen and opened her mouth to bite his hand. This person had obviously tricked her into coming back. If she didn't give birth to the child, he wouldn't let her go into the forest. Jingyu knew that Xiao Chen did it for her own good, but Jingyu still felt very angry for a moment. Her eyes were full of ferocity, and she chased after Xiao Chen like a wolf cub. She seemed to have made a lot of noise on the bed for a long time. Summer was a little irritable. Jingyu's stomach was getting bigger and bigger day by day. In the imperial city, the matters of the imperial court were gradually fading away. Shangwan Linglan's wedding was over, and August was coming. The Wangfu was getting more and more lively. "Sister-in-law, do you understand these accounts?" Jingyu's belly was almost 5 months old, and it was very obvious. These days, she was at home talking to Fengju about the matters of the restaurant. Occasionally, when she was free, Jingyu would take Fengju to the restaurant, tailor shop, and other places to learn and see how these businesses were run. Shen Yuqing, Lu Man, and the others all knew that Jingyu wouldn't always be here. After knowing that Fengju was Jingyu's sister-in-law, everyone was very respectful to Fengju. I can understand. Fengju slowly nodded. There was a faint smile in his eyes as he said, "Before, I didn't know that running a business was such an interesting thing. During this period of time, I learned from you and realized that there were so many things that I didn't know." Sister-in-law, you're making fun of me. Jingyu sat on the side and took a sip of warm water before saying, "Compared to Uncle Shun and Sister Man, what I know is just superficial. If there's anything that I don't understand in the future, just ask." Chapter 1808. I will. Fengju nodded slowly. Jingyu and Fengju were talking in a room when they suddenly heard a series of hurried footsteps. Jingyu turned her head and saw 15th Interrogation running in with a panicked face. "What's going on?" Jingyu saw this scene and widened her eyes in shock. She looked at 15th Interrogation and asked, "Why are you so flustered?" Brothel Master Feng was injured by someone. Boss brought her back. 15th Interrogation's face was slightly pale as he said, "Master asked Madam to go over." Jingyu knew from 15th Interrogation's reaction that something big must have happened. She immediately looked at Fengju and hurried to the side yard. In this small yard, everyone was here. Jingyu quickened her pace and walked over with Fengju's help. "Xiao Chen, what happened?" Jingyu frowned and asked. You're here." Xiao Chen saw Jingyu's arrival and turned to look. Hellion Theo was standing beside Xiao Chen. His face was so ugly that it was scary. "What's going on?" Jingyu frowned slightly. She had just approached the room when she smelled the scent of fresh blood. Jingyu frowned deeply and turned to look inside the room. On the bed in the room, there was a figure lying on it. The ground was covered in gauze, and there were basins of blood. Jingyu frowned when she saw this scene, and her eyes were filled with solemn surprise. "What's going on?" Jingyu frowned and turned to the side. Xing, he was gritting his teeth. Blood was flowing out from his wrist. Jingyu clearly saw that the blood was red when it first flowed out. However, when it flowed to the floor, it slowly turned black. SSS. Jingyu saw this scene and instantly sucked in a breath of cold air. What kind of poison was this? What happened? Jingyu frowned deeply at this scene. "This is goo poison." Xiao Chan turned to Jingyu and said, "Phone watching is unconscious and Xing, he doesn't know anything. He only dragged phone watching back and got poisoned. Luckily, the poison wasn't deep and he was fine after the blood was released." Goo poison. When Jingyu heard this term again, the first person that came to mind was Madame Ye. Wasn't she Xiao Chen's sister? Xiao Chen never mentioned this matter, and Jingyu never looked into it. Back then, Xiao Chen killed Madame Ye with his own hands. Jingyu saw it with her own eyes. Wasn't Madame Ye dead? Where did this goo poison come from? Where did Xing Yi find phone watching? Jingyu turned to Xing Yi and asked. Outside the northern suburbs. Xing Yi's face was also pale. He pursed his lips tightly and said, "This subordinate went out to handle some matters. On the way back, this subordinate saw Manor Lord Feng lying in the bushes covered in blood, so I brought him back. Didn't you see anyone in the surroundings? Didn't you leave anything behind?" Jingyu asked with a deep frown. Xing Yi slowly shook his head. Clearly, Xiao Chen must have asked about this long ago. Now, it looked like they could only wait until Feng Maching woke up to find out what was going on. Why would goo poison appear in the Imperial City? Jingyu pursed her lips tightly and looked at Xiao Chen uneasily. She asked, could it be that Madame Ye's subordinates are still hiding in the Imperial City? Chapter 1809. Xiao Chen slowly shook his head. Ninth Royal Uncle. This young master's injury has been stopped. His life is not in danger for the time being, but the poison in his body is still spreading. If the poison in his body is not removed within 10 days, the poison in his body will spread to his internal organs. When that time comes, even the gods will be powerless to do anything. The imperial physician bowed deeply to Xiao Chun. His tightly knitted brows caused the expressions of everyone in the room to turn ugly. Third Xing sent a message to Feng Ling. Have him quickly come to the Tokyo Imperial City. Xiao Chun turned his head and said to Third Xing. Only then did he turn his head to ask the imperial physician about the situation. He ordered people to tidy up the room and went out of the living room. With the current situation, there's nothing we can do. Xiao Chun sat down on a chair in the living room. He pursed his lips slightly and said, Feng Ling comes from Yaojiang. Perhaps Feng Ling will have a solution for the matter of the goo poison. We'll have to wait until Feng Maching wakes up before we know what happened. Xiao Chen's tone was grave. Why did Feng Maching leave the city alone? Or did he go to the northern suburbs? Jingyu was very confused. She didn't know why, but Feng Maching's serious injuries and the sudden appearance of the goo poison gave Jingyu a very strange feeling. It seemed that this peace that was hard to come by was about to be broken. Jingyu sighed deeply. She placed her hand on her stomach. The uneasiness in her heart grew bit by bit. Xiaochen seemed to feel uneasy. He reached out to hold Jingyu's other hand. When he turned his head, his pitch-black eyes were filled with darkness. I'm fine. Jingyu knew that Xiao Chun was worried about her. She shook her head slightly and smiled faintly at Xiao Chun, indicating that Xiao Chun didn't need to worry. After the imperial physician left, everyone in the room also retreated. Xiao Chun arranged for Xing to stay in the room next door. Although Xing he wasn't injured, his body was weak. He should rest well for the next few days and see if the goo poison was removed. Xiao Chun, I wanted to ask you before. What's the matter with this Madame Nia from Yaojiang? Jingyu and Xiao Chun had also returned to their own courtyard. Jingyu held it in for so long. She couldn't help but ask. She's my foster mother's daughter. Xiao Chun seemed to know what Jingyu wanted to ask. After a moment of silence, he said calmly, My biological mother passed away when I was young. My adoptive mother raised me, but I never thought that she was a woman from Yaojiang. Foster mother? Then who's your wet nurse? Jingyu was instantly dumbfounded by Xiao Chen's tangled relationship. She looked at Xiao Chun with a puzzled expression and asked. Xiao Chun shook his head slightly and sat silently at the side. It seemed like he was thinking about how to tell Jingyu, but also seemed like he didn't know how to say it. Jingyu sat quietly beside Xiao Chun and wasn't in a hurry to ask. My foster mother had ill intentions towards me, so I killed her. At that time, I was only 6 or 7 years old. Xiao Chun deeply spat out this sentence. It was just this short sentence, but it seemed to carry a huge amount of information. It made Jingyu, who was sitting at the side, tremble violently. What do you mean by having ill intentions? Jingyu turned to look at Xiao Chun with pale lips. Seeing Xiao Chen's silent appearance, Jingyu reached out to hold Xiao Chen's hand. However, she found that Xiao Chen's hand was frighteningly cold. I don't want to talk about these disgusting things in my life. Xiao Chun felt Jingyu approaching. He turned to look at Jingyu and said, Every time I think about these things, I feel that. I'm very dirty. Chapter 1810. Xiao Chun. Jingyu suddenly grasped Xiao Chen's hand tightly. She stood up and reached out to pull Xiao Chun into her embrace. Her golden green eyes sparkled as she said, Don't talk about it anymore. Don't think about it anymore. I don't want to know. She locked me in a room and forced me. Nia Yinxian watched from the side. I powerlessly begged my foster mother not to. Xiao Chen's entire body was frighteningly cold. The words that came out of Xiao Chen's mouth made Jingyu feel as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. Enough. Don't talk about it anymore. Jingyu reached out to cover Xiao Chen's mouth. She didn't dare to imagine what Xiao Chun, who was only 6 years old, had experienced. Jingyu suddenly understood. No one was born cold. Back then, there was a rumor about the 9th emperors. It said that anyone who met the 9th emperors would die. Perhaps this was the reason why Xiao Chun was resisting. Or perhaps it was because of what happened back then that cast a shadow over Xiao Chen's heart. Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu's slightly moist eyes and reached out to take her hand. His pitch-black eyes sparkled as he reached out to hug Jingyu with a trembling hand. He asked, do you hate me? You fool. Jingyu smiled through her tears. She reached out to hug Xiao Chun and said, I only hate that I didn't appear by your side earlier. Otherwise, I would have torn those people to shreds. That disgusting woman actually did that to a child like Xiao Chun. She didn't know how Xiao Chun spent those days alone. Jingyu's hand that hugged Xiao Chun tightened. Madam Ye, was that woman's daughter, Nie Yanqian? Jingyu deeply furrowed her brows. Madam Ye was dead, but there were definitely remnants of power in Miaojiang. Lying on the bed, Jingyu was still thinking about Xiao Chen's words. No wonder Jingyu kept silent when Xiao Chun mentioned Madam Ye. When she was young, Xiao Chen never talked about his childhood. It was probably because Xiao Chun didn't want to touch on this dark past. Jingyu fell asleep with her thoughts in a daze. But not long after she fell asleep, she heard the trembling of the people around her. The screams woke her up from her dream in an instant. Xiao Chen closed his eyes tightly. His handsome face was covered in sweat, as if he was haunted by a terrible nightmare. No, don't come over. Don't. Xiao Chun helplessly spat out these words. Jingyu hurriedly pushed Xiao Chun and called out anxiously, Xiao Chun, Xiao Chun, hurry and wake up. Xiao Chun. Jingyu half knelt and bent over slightly as she called out Xiao Chen's name. Xiao Chen abruptly opened his eyes. His pitch-black eyes were filled with monstrous, murderous intent. Jingyu had never seen Xiao Chun with such an expression. Her heart trembled violently, and she paled as she clutched her chest. This Xiao Chun was truly too frightening. Xiao Chun, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare? Jingyu reached out to touch Xiao Chen's hand. Only then did she realize that Xiao Chen's palm was covered in cold sweat. Xiao Chen saw Jingyu and heard Jingyu's voice. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. He lifted his hand to wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead. He slowly sat up and asked in a hoarse voice, Did I wake you up? Chapter 1811. Don't worry, I'll get you some water. Jingyu stood up and poured a cup of cold water for Xiao Chun to drink, suppressing the uneasiness in her heart. Jingyu took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the sweat off Xiao Chen's forehead. She looked deeply at Xiao Chun and asked, How are you feeling? Are you feeling better? I'm fine. Xiao Chen closed his eyes tiredly and said, I just dreamed of something I didn't want to dream of. It's fine. It was just a dream. Jingyu seemed to know what Xiao Chen dreamed of. She silently reached out and gently caressed Xiao Chen's face and said, I'm here, it's fine. When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's words, he raised his head slightly and saw the faint smile on Jingyu's face. He held Jingyu's hand and lay down on the bed again. He reached out and hugged Jingyu in his arms. Only then did he feel his flustered heart slowly calm down. The night was not peaceful, so Jingyu slept until late in the morning the next day. She propped herself up and got up. Yin Xiao and Lian Man helped Jingyu get dressed. Where's Xiao Chun? Jingyu looked at Yin Xiao, who was combing her hair in the mirror, and asked with her head lowered. The 9th Emperors went out early in the morning. This servant doesn't know where the 9th Emperors went, Yin Xiao replied. When Jingyu heard Yin Xiao's words, she raised her eyebrows slightly and didn't ask any more questions. Where did Xiao Chun go early in the morning? Jingyu tidied up a little and ate some food. Then she walked to the side courtyard to visit Feng Maching. When she walked into the courtyard, she saw Xing Yi and Xing Er talking. Madam, Xing Yi and Xing Er stood up when they saw Jingyu. Xing Er, why are you here instead of staying in the general's residence? Jingyu stepped forward and stood beside the two of them. She asked curiously, I heard that something happened to Boss, so I came to see if there's anything I can help with. Xing Er looked at Jingyu and frowned slightly. He said solemnly, Weren't the people from Yaojiang chased away? Why is there still poison? I don't know about this either. I'm sending someone to investigate. Jingyu gestured for Xing Yi and Xing Er to sit down. Then she turned to look at Xing Yi and asked, Are you feeling better today? Do you feel any discomfort? Thank you for your concern, madam. This subordinate is fine. Xing Yi bowed and said, It's good that you're fine. I'll go check on Feng Maching. You guys chat first. After Jingyu casually asked a few questions, she turned to the room on the other side. Inside the room, Feng Maching was still unconscious. The manservant standing by the bed was guarding him. When he saw Jing Yu's arrival, he hurriedly bowed. No need to be so courteous. How is phone watching? Jing Yu asked with a wave of her hand. He's still unconscious. We can't even feed him medicine. If it wasn't for Emperor Helian's help, we wouldn't have been able to feed him the medicine, the servant said with a conflicted expression. Helian Theo? He's still here? Jing Yu was slightly stunned when she heard the servant's words. A few days ago, he was still fighting with phone watching. Jing Yu thought that Helian Theo was the happiest to see phone watching injured. That's right. Emperor Helian stayed by Brothel Master Fang's bed all night. This lowly one didn't know that the two of them had such a good relationship. The servant nodded seriously. After he finished speaking, Jing Yu's expression became even more strange. Good relationship. Chapter 1812. How is that possible? Jing Yu glanced at the servant. Just as she was about to question him again, she saw Helian Theo walking in with the medicine. She was stunned and raised her hand to dismiss the servant. Helian Theo was also surprised to see Jing Yu. Then he walked to the table with the medicine in his hand and put it down. Helian Theo, you didn't brew this medicine yourself, right? Jing Yu looked at Helian Theo strangely and asked. I had nothing to do anyway. When Helian Theo said this, even Helian Theo felt guilty, let alone Jing Yu. Don't be funny. Jing Yu sneered and looked at Helian Theo. A few days ago, you chased after Phone Watching and wanted to beat him to death. After all, Phone Watching was drunk and molested you. Now, you're taking care of him so calmly? Helian Theo, you will make me think the wrong way. Jing Yu's golden green eyes stared at Helian Theo. When she saw Jing Yu's lowered eyes, she became even more curious, as if she had discovered something interesting. The medicine is cold. Helian Xiao did not say anything. He reached out and walked towards Phone Watching with the medicine. He reached out and helped Phone Watching up. He raised his hand and pinched Phone Watching's chin. As he rubbed Phone Watching's chest, he poured the medicinal soup down his throat. Jing Yu looked at this scene and blinked her eyes in amusement. Looking at Helian Xiaoxiao's appearance, she always felt a sense of curiosity. Her slightly curved eyebrows made Helian, who was at the side, feel as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Let's go outside. Helian Theo called for someone to watch over Phone Watching and walked outside. Phone Watching was chased out of the Imperial City by me. Helian Xiao sat down on a stone chair at the side and said, It was me who chased him time and time again. He had no choice but to leave the city because he had nowhere to hide. If I didn't chase him, he wouldn't have left the city and wouldn't have suffered such heavy injuries. So, I can't let him die. Helian Theo said coldly. Jing Yu looked at Phone Watching. Phone Watching's face was still as stunning as when she first met him. However, there was a deeper meaning in his eyes. Jing Yu looked at Helian Xiao and frowned slightly. Although Helian Xiao said that, Jing Yu felt that it wasn't just that. He won't die. Jing Yu straightened her body slightly and said very calmly, When Phone Ling comes, Phone Watching will be cured. Yes. Helian Xiao nodded slightly in response. After sitting for a while, Jing Yu got up and left. When she stepped out of the courtyard, Helian Theo turned his head slightly. Helian Theo was still sitting quietly in the courtyard. There didn't seem to be any other emotions in his calm eyes. Helian Theo had changed. He became very quiet. Helian Theo wasn't like this when she first met Helian Theo. Jing Yu slowly turned and walked away. She returned to her courtyard to rest. Xiaoqian only returned in the afternoon. When Jing Yu asked, Xiaoqian only said that he went to the northern suburbs to see if there were any suspicious signs. However, he didn't find anything. Phone Ling will be here in 5 or 6 days. We can only wait now. Xiaoqian picked up the tea on the table and took a sip. Jing Yu nodded and didn't say anything else. Just as the two of them were resting, they heard news from the front hall. Xingxin stood in front of Jing Yu and Xiaoqian and said, Master, Madam, young Master Fong has returned. He is waiting in the front hall. Chapter 1813. The Fong Family? Jing Yu was slightly taken aback when she heard that. She didn't come back to her senses for a moment. Fong Zicheng? Jing Yu asked in surprise. Yes. Third Xing nodded slowly. Fang Ziqing is back. Didn't he travel the world? Fang Ziqing had left long ago when they were in Jinling. It had been so long, but there was no news of him. Jingyu thought that the next time they met would be a long time later. She didn't know where they would meet again. She didn't expect Fang Ziqing to return to Tokyo Imperial City. Grand Secretary Fang had retired and returned to his hometown. Fang Ziqing didn't have any relatives in the capital, right? Let's go and take a look. Xiao Chan was only surprised for a moment. Then, he stood up and walked towards the front hall. The moment he stepped into the front hall, he saw a man in a light gray robe. His back was facing everyone, and he was curiously studying the murals on the wall. The man seemed to have heard the commotion behind him. He was slightly taken aback before he turned around. That familiar face had a slight smile on it. It was still like a fox, but the pair of eyes that looked at him seemed to have become much clearer. Ninth Emperor's, Ninth Imperial Concubine, long time no see. How have you been? Fang Ziqing bowed politely. Jingyu looked at Fang Ziqing and was slightly stunned. The Fang Ziqinger memory seemed to be like this, but also didn't seem like this. His originally fair face seemed to be tanned, and his body seemed to be much taller. It also seemed like Fang Ziqing had always been like this, but it also didn't seem like this. Jingyu couldn't help but laugh. She raised her eyebrows slightly and smiled at Fang Ziqing. Welcome back. Fang Ziqing's eyes were full of smiles when he heard Jingyu's words. After not seeing her for so long, there was a sense of shyness and alienation. Finally, after a few words, he felt much more comfortable and sat in the hall to talk. It's been so long. Where have you been? Jingyu raised her hand slightly and poured a cup of tea for Fang Ziqing before asking. All over the world, they've gone everywhere. Fang Ziqing sighed and said, there are thousands of worlds described in books. It's better to see them myself. This time, I met many people and encountered many things. Only then did I know how big the world is. Looking at you, you really do look like someone who has traveled far away. Jingyu smiled faintly and asked, then why did you come back? Mother is seriously ill, so I came back. I just came back from my hometown, and Mother's body is fine, so I came to the capital to see you. Fang Ziqing arched his eyebrows and said, I just didn't expect so many things to happen in such a short time. Yes, Jingyu replied faintly. Since you're here to visit, then stay for a few more days. Xiao Chan said, it's been a long time since I last played in the Imperial City. Let's see if there have been any changes in the Imperial City. Haha, that's exactly what I was thinking. Fang Ziqing agreed happily. However, when the servant girl was about to bring Fang Ziqing to the guest room, Fang Ziqing suddenly turned his head and said with some confusion, oh right, on my way into the city, I seem to have seen the Prime Minister's second daughter, Jing Yin. She was brought back? Fang Ziqing looked at Jingyu and asked, what? When Jingyu heard Fang Ziqing's words, she opened her eyes wide in shock and asked, you saw Jing Yin? Chapter 1814. I didn't go forward to confirm. I only saw her from afar. That's right, it's Jing Yin. Fang Ziqing pursed his lips and said, I'm not so bad that I can't recognize people. Furthermore, it's the famous Jing Yin from the Imperial City. When Jingyu heard this, she immediately frowned. She turned around and looked at Xiao Chun. They both saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. I thought that she was already dead. I didn't expect her to still be alive. Furthermore, she appeared in front of everyone. How shocking. Jingyu pursed her lips and said coldly, I will send someone to investigate this matter. Xiao Chun frowned and said in a low voice. It was nighttime. Jingyu walked around the room, but couldn't fall asleep. Xiao Chun was in the study room. Jingyu felt that the room was very stuffy and asked Yin Xiao to help her out for a walk. The weather in August was still hot. Jingyu walked on the small path with a cloak draped over her shoulders. She pursed her lips and was lost in thought. The sky outside was pitch black, but the night breeze made Jingyu feel much more comfortable. Thinking about what Fang Ziqing said today, she didn't know why, but she couldn't feel at ease. Just as Jingyu was lost in thought, she suddenly saw a figure outside. Fang Ziqing, who had changed into a white robe, was also walking. When he saw Jingyu from afar, he seemed to be surprised. He paused for a moment before walking in front of Jingyu. He bowed slightly and said, "The ninth imperial concubine is also out for a walk." Jingyu looked at Feng Zicheng. Then, she curled her lips and asked, "When did you become so polite? Today is different from the past. Furthermore, we are in the palace." When Feng Zicheng heard Jingyu's words, he was slightly taken aback. That's true. When Jingyu heard Feng Zicheng's words, she couldn't help but laugh. Her eyes were cold as she turned around and continued walking forward. Feng Zicheng hesitated for a moment before following behind Jingyu. Jingyu regarded Feng Zicheng as a friend, but Feng Zicheng seemed to be deliberately avoiding her. His alienation made Jingyu feel a little strange, but she didn't say anything. Jingyu's original intention was to come out to relax, but she seemed to have made herself unhappy. After exchanging a few words, Jingyu turned around and returned to her room. Feng Zicheng stood where he was and watched Jingyu leave. He lowered his head slightly to hide the bitterness in his eyes. He turned around and walked back along the path he came from. When Jingyu returned to her room, Xiao Chun was already inside. When Xiao Chun saw that Jingyu had returned, he quickly stood up and said in dissatisfaction, "It's so late. Why are you still walking around?" "It was a little stuffy in the room, so I went out for a walk." Jingyu smiled at Xiao Chun and said, "Are you all done with your work?" "Yes," Xiao Chun replied and removed the cloak on Jingyu's body. He waved his hand to dismissing Xiao and the others before saying, "You are pregnant. You are not allowed to walk around." "It's fine. This is the palace." Jingyu smiled and said, "I just went out and bumped into Feng Zicheng. Feng Zicheng has changed a lot compared to before. You also know that it was in the past." Xiao Chun was very dissatisfied as he reached out and half-hugged Jingyu as he walked towards the bed and said, "These few days, I have been feeling uneasy. You stay in the palace and don't go out to places like restaurants, okay?" Chapter 18:15. When Jingyu heard Xiao Chen's words, she immediately frowned and asked, "Is it that serious? We don't know the details of the enemy, so it's better to be careful for the time being." Xiao Chen looked deeply at Jingyu and said. Jingyu slowly nodded in agreement. She was pregnant, so Jingyu didn't dare to act recklessly. When Xiao Chun saw Jingyu nod in agreement, he slowly let out a sigh of relief. In the next few days, the prince's mansion was very lively. Jing Lang and Feng Zicheng hadn't seen each other for a long time, and when they met, they ate and drank to their heart's content. The two of them talked for a long time in the pavilion, sometimes laughing and sometimes being silent. Jingyu and Feng Zhu walked along the corridor. From afar, Jingyu saw Hellion Theo sitting under a tree. Hellion Theo was sitting by the water beside the willow pond. His eyes were quietly looking at the ripples in the water in the distance. Jingyu looked at Hellion Theo and slightly frowned. She turned to Feng Zhu and said, "Sister-in-law, you go back first. I'll be there in a while." Feng Zhu glanced at Hellion Theo and gently smiled and nodded. Jingyu then turned and walked in the direction of Hellion Theo. Jingyu's footsteps probably woke Hellion Theo up. At this moment, Hellion Theo turned his head and saw Jingyu. He slightly stood up. "Sit down. After walking for a long time, I'm tired." Jingyu also sat down on the stone chair. Hellion Theo also sat down. "You seem to have something on your mind these few days?" Jingyu turned her head to look at Hellion Xiu's face and asked with a slight smile. "Nothing. I'll leave when Feng Mo wakes up." Hellion Theo pursed his lips slightly and replied, "Why are you in such a hurry?" Jingyu was slightly taken aback. She turned to look at Hellion Theo and asked, "Did something happen at Northern Pastoral?" "No." Hellion Theo shook his head slightly and said, "It's just that we've been out for a long time, and it's time to go back." Jingyu frowned when she heard Hellion Theo's words. When she saw that Hellion Theo didn't want to talk about it, she calmly curled her lips and didn't say anything. She sat quietly for a moment before she got up and left. Jingyu walked forward for a while. When she saw the person walking towards her, she was slightly stunned. Feng Zicheng probably didn't expect to meet Jingyu by the river. Feng Zicheng slightly stopped in his tracks and bowed to Jingyu. Jingyu looked at Feng Zicheng silently for a moment. She actually didn't know how to address Feng Zicheng. It didn't seem appropriate to call him by his name. Calling him young Master Fong sounded very distant. Zicheng, where are you going? Jingyu was silent for a moment before she calmly addressed him in such a gentle manner. Her expression didn't change. However, when Fong Zicheng heard this, he immediately froze on the spot. He looked up at Jingyu. When he saw Jingyu's calm expression, he slowly suppressed the strange beating of his heart. I want to take a walk on the streets. Fong Zicheng slightly raised his eyebrows and replied. Then be careful. Jingyu nodded and smiled slightly before she walked past Fong Zicheng. Fong Zicheng turned around and looked at Jingyu's back. Back then, he had wondered many times when Jingyu would call him Zicheng. However, he didn't expect to hear it today. What Fong Zicheng was thinking was that Jingyu wouldn't shout his name so loudly anymore. She wouldn't drag him along on the streets and ask him to treat her to a meal. She wouldn't get lost and ask him to send her back to the prince's mansion. That noisy little girl was carefree and unrestrained, as if she didn't care about anything. Now everything was gone. Chapter 1816. Fong Zicheng slowly retracted his gaze and walked outside. The surroundings seemed to be quiet. Jingyu narrowed her eyes seriously. She returned to her room and sat down. She actually felt so irritated. Not long after, Xiaobai came again. He chatted with Jingyu for a while before leaving again. In the blink of an eye, 5 or 6 days passed. Feng Ling also came. Jingyu heard the news of Feng Ling's arrival and hurriedly went to the side courtyard. Xiao Chun and the others were in the courtyard. The door was closed. Xing Er, Jing Lang, and the others were waiting outside. When they saw Jingyu arrive, they all turned around. Jingyu also bowed slightly to the others. She looked at the situation in the room and asked with a frown, "What's the situation inside?" Feng Ling and Xiao Chun are inside. They just went in for a while. I don't know the situation yet, Jingyu said calmly after hearing Jingyu's question. My brother Ling is here. Nothing will happen. Just as Jingyu was worrying, she suddenly heard these words. When Jingyu turned her head to look, she discovered that the little girl, Feng Yu, had also followed. She immediately arched her eyebrows in interest and said, Your big brother Ling is so powerful. Oof. Don't you look down on us Miaojiang people, Feng Yu said impolitely. Shameless boasting. Feng Yu was talking to Jingyu. Before Jingyu could say anything, she heard a very impolite snort from behind her. When Jingyu turned around, she saw Xiaobai walking over. Mother, Xiaobai called out softly. He then turned to look at Jinglang and called out, Uncle, why are you here? Jinglang asked as he reached out and patted Xiaobai's head. I had nothing to do over there, so I came over to take a look. Who knew that I would hear such shameless boasting? Xiaobai said as he looked at Feng Yu with disdain. Who is boasting shamelessly? I? You? When Feng Yu saw Xiaobai, it was as if a bomb had been ignited. Her beautiful eyes widened as she stared at Xiaobai fiercely and said, If it wasn't for my brother Ling telling me to use goo, I would have caught one and scared you to death. You know how to control goo? Jingyu asked curiously when she heard Feng Yu's words. Who in Miaojiang doesn't know how to do it? Feng Yu rolled her eyes in disdain and said, In our Miaojiang, you can see goo worms on the streets. Since you are so powerful, why did you come to the mainland? Just stay in your Miaojiang. Xiaobai raised his eyebrows coldly. He looked at Feng Yu up and down and said, I see that you have learned martial arts from the mainland. I'm too lazy to talk to you. Feng Yu was very angry at Xiaobai's words. She glared at Xiaobai fiercely and turned to leave. She sat on the side and didn't say anything. Jingyu looked at this scene and shook her head helplessly. She really didn't know why Xiaobai and Feng Yu were against each other. Look at how they didn't give in to each other when they met. Jingyu shook her head helplessly. She turned her head and continued to watch the situation in the room. Just as everyone was waiting outside, the closed door finally opened. Xiao Chun walked out first, followed by Helian Theo and Feng Ling. How is it? Jingyu took a step forward and asked. It's fine. Let's talk outside. Xiao Chun responded and led everyone to the living room before sitting down. Chapter 1817. The poison in Feng Maching's body is just an ordinary poison. However, The one who poisoned Feng Maching is obviously not the same person as the one who injured him. Those wounds are obviously caused by people from Jianghu. Feng Ling slightly pursed her lips and said, "Now Feng Maching is fine. You should wake up tomorrow." "Feng Ling, have you received any news recently? Have people from Yaojiang sneaked into the mainland?" Jingyu slightly pursed her lips and looked at Feng Ling and asked, "I haven't heard any news recently." Feng Ling shook her head seriously and said, "It seems that the people from Yaojiang must have taken some other way to get in. The ability of our Darkeen sect is not as good as that of the Constellation Palace. We have to ask Suyu for help." "Well, let Suyu find out what's going on with the people from Yaojiang." Jingyu slowly nodded and agreed. The person who poisoned him doesn't seem to be someone with high status. The poison is very simple. Maybe it was just an accident that he met Feng Maching, Feng Ling said. "I hope it was an accident." Jingyu didn't think so. She just said this sentence faintly and then sat silently to the side. "Did you encounter anything else along the way?" Xiao Chun turned to look at Feng Ling and asked. "It went well." Feng Ling slightly nodded and said, "But I learned that Suyu was near the imperial city of Tokyo, so I sent her a message directly. I guess she will arrive in 2 days. When she arrives, we will find out what's going on with Miaojiang. Well, it saves us a lot of trouble." Xiao Chan slowly nodded and then talked about the people from Yaojiang and Feng Maching's injuries. Feng Maching didn't wake up, so everyone was just guessing. So they didn't say much. They waited until Feng Maching woke up and then made plans. Late at night, Helian chased away the night watchman, as usual, and walked to Feng Maching's bed. Looking at Feng Maching's rosy face, he slowly heaved a sigh of relief. He sat down by the bed and looked at Feng Maching. He was so handsome, but he disguised himself as a woman. When Helian Theo first saw him, he was disgusted. But what happened later? Why didn't she hate him after that? Perhaps it was because he had a good relationship with Jingyu, so he was always polite to him. Even when he was really angry, he never seemed to get angry. Later on, when he was so angry that he hit and scolded him, he was still laughing and joking. Helian Theo couldn't get rid of him no matter what he did. What made Helian Theo even angrier was that this person was obviously a man, yet he spoke in such a manner. This made Helian Theo even angrier. What happened after that? It was probably because Helian Theo suddenly felt that this person didn't seem to be as disgusting as before. It was probably because of his humble fawning that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry that he allowed him to stay in the palace. However, the imperial palace was huge, but he couldn't keep it. He could still vaguely remember the scene of that day. On the roof, he drank to his heart's content while facing the stars in the sky. Under the starry sky, his deep eyes were filled with passion, and it shocked him fiercely. At that moment, an irresistible feeling of disgust and rejection surged in his heart. He almost went crazy and cursed him fiercely. Even after so long, Helian Theo still remembered that at that moment, Feng Maching's face was full of astonishment, and those eyes that were a little bit silent. In the end, he saw him leave with a laugh. He thought that he would never see him again in this life. Who knew that fate was so funny? Chapter 1818. Helian Theo leaned against the bed absent-mindedly. He sat at the end of the bed and quietly looked at Feng Maching. This face had entered his mind at some point in time. For countless days and nights, Helian Theo had not thought of Jingyu, but him. Helian Theo pursed his lips tightly and suppressed the strange discomfort in his heart. He turned around to get water. Just like he did every night, he wrung the towel dry and wiped Feng Maching's face bit by bit. Then he moved down. Just as he reached out to untie Feng Maching's clothes, his wrist was suddenly grabbed by a hand. Helian Theo's hand trembled violently. The towel in his hand slipped and landed on Feng Maching's chest. Helian Theo raised his head in shock and saw Feng Maching's open eyes. There was a faint calmness in his eyes. When did you wake up?" Helian Theo forced himself to calm down. He looked at Feng Maching's hand and hurriedly reached out to break free. However, Feng Maching held on tightly and did not let go. "Feng Maching, let go." Hellion Theo's expression turned ugly bit by bit. Just as he was about to speak again, Feng Maching let go of his hand expressionlessly. Then he slowly closed his eyes as if the person who had just opened his eyes was just an illusion. I want to see Xiao Chun. Feng Maching's throat moved slightly before he spat out a very hoarse sentence. After Feng Maching let go of Hellion Theo's hand, he stood up and took a deep breath. He turned around and walked out of the room. His heart could not be suppressed no matter how hard he tried. The news of Feng Maching waking up alarmed Xiao, Chun, and Jingyu. The two who were sleeping soundly got up. Jingyu wanted to go with Xiao Chun, but Xiao Chun did not agree no matter what. Jingyu had no choice but to listen and stay in the room to wait for Xiao Chun to return. Xiao Chun returned not long after. Jingyu was in the room looking forward to Xiao Chun's return. When she saw Xiao Chun return, she quickly got out of bed and greeted him. She reached out to help Xiao Chun take off his coat and asked, "What's the situation outside?" Feng Maching is fine. Now that he's awake, he just needs to recuperate. Xiao Chun pursed his lips slightly and said, "As for the injuries on his body, he was injured by an enemy. I didn't pay attention to it at the moment." "Then what's the deal with the goo poison?" Jingyu frowned and asked again. "That's the key," Xiao Chun said very quietly. Feng Maching said that he met a girl who asked for directions. However, the girl was wearing a veil, and he couldn't see her face clearly. She asked for the location of a rich restaurant. And then? Jingyu frowned slightly. She reached out to put the robe on the screen and continued to ask. Feng Maching knew and naturally pointed the way. However, not long after he pointed the way, he met an enemy. With Feng Maching's ability, he shouldn't have been injured, but he was suddenly poisoned. If he hadn't used the last of his strength to escape and met Xing Yi, he would have probably died. Xiao Chen's eyes were filled with coldness. Jingyu immediately frowned after hearing Xiao Chen's words. So, the problem lies with the girl who asked for directions? Why did she choose Feng Maching? Jingyu was very puzzled. "I don't know." Xiao Chen shook his head slowly and said, "Feng Maching has just woken up, and his body is still very weak. Let him have a good rest. It won't be too late to ask him tomorrow. It's good to know that Feng Maching is fine after waking up." Chapter 18-19. Jingyu nodded slowly in response. The next morning, Jingyu and Xiao Chen got up and went to Feng Maching's courtyard. They saw Hellion Theo standing outside the door. "Why are you standing here? Why aren't you going in?" Jingyu raised her eyebrows and looked at Hellion Theo strangely. "I'm about to go in." Hellion Theo was stunned when he saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Jingyu looked at Hellion Theo and found it strange. She raised her eyebrows and went in first. Hellion Theo followed Jingyu and Xiao Chun in. The guards in the room were feeding Feng Maching medicine. Feng Maching finished the medicine in big gulps without even frowning. He nodded slightly when he saw Jingyu and Xiao Chun arrive. "How is it? Do you feel better?" Jingyu walked to the side and sat down. She looked at Feng Maching and asked, "Much better. My inner strength is recovering bit by bit." Feng Maching nodded slowly. After that, Jing Lang and Interrogation Officer 1 arrived as well. Feng Ling looked at Feng Maching and nodded in satisfaction, saying, "This medicine is still useful. The poison in your body has been cleansed." Feng Yu, who was at the side, blinked slightly as she looked at Feng Maching. "Uncle Feng, you're still much more pleasing to the eye," Feng Yu said seriously. "Who are you calling uncle?" Feng Maching's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and glared at Feng Yu. "My big brother Ling saved you. Don't think of repaying kindness with ingratitude." As Feng Yu spoke, she hid behind Feng Ling and bared her teeth at Feng Maching. When Feng Maching saw Feng Yu like this, he snorted in annoyance. Don't be rude." Feng Ling glared at Feng Yu. Feng Yu immediately became obedient. "The goo poison in Miaojiang is actually so powerful. I didn't notice it at all," Feng Maching said helplessly. "Feng Maching, did you really get poisoned after meeting the girl who asked for directions?" Jingyu asked. "Yes." Feng Maching nodded slowly. "Tell me, what did this young lady ask you?" "You can't leave out a single word." Jingyu looked at Feng Maching solemnly and asked. "At that time, I was walking on the street. That girl looked left and right, then walked up to me and asked if there was a very novel restaurant in the Imperial City called You Have Money. She asked me where this restaurant was. At that time, I said, Miss, you've asked the right person. I happen to know the owner of that restaurant, so I gave this misdirections. She seemed to be surprised for a moment, and then said that I know the owner of this restaurant. I said yes, and then she smiled and said that she really asked the right person. After that, she thanked me politely and walked in the direction I pointed. After Feng Maching finished his narration, everyone in the room looked at each other. There didn't seem to be anything strange. Jingyu sat at the side and fell into deep thought. What's wrong, Is there something wrong? Xiaochen looked at Jingyu's expression and raised his eyebrows slightly. Very wrong. Jingyu's heart was full of doubts. She kept feeling that something was wrong. She turned to Feng Maching and asked again, Didn't you see that girl's face? I didn't see it. Feng Maching shook his head slowly. Then, as if he thought of something, he suddenly said, But this girl's accent sounded like a local, and there was a scar on her wrist. Looking at the scar, it looked like a cut. Chapter 1820. Because I didn't take a closer look, I can't be sure. I'm just curious. She's a local, so how could she not know where Have Money Comes restaurant is? A local. Jingyu frowned deeply as if she was thinking about something. Everyone looked at Jingyu and began to ponder. I know, Jingyu suddenly said. It must be because you said you knew the owner of the restaurant. What do you mean? Feng Maching was slightly stunned and asked in confusion. This person asking for directions is probably a pretense. Or is he trying to sound us out? Anyway, no matter what the reason was, this girl definitely didn't want to poison you before you said you knew the owner of the restaurant. But after you said you knew her, she poisoned you, Jingyu said in a deep voice. That's why she said that last sentence. She really asked the right person, Jingyu said with her lips tightly pursed. If that's the case, could this girl be targeting you? Feng Maching's expression changed slightly. He looked at Jingyu with a frown and said in a deep voice, Then why did she ask about the restaurant? Why did she find you through the restaurant? I don't know. Jingyu shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with coldness. Xiaochen slowly frowned. If the truth was as Jingyu said, then who was this girl and what was her motive? Although he didn't know what her motive was, judging from her posture, she didn't come with good intentions. I'll send someone to investigate this matter, Xiaochen said slowly. Feng Maching, rest well and recover from your injuries. If you think of anything else, remember to tell me immediately. Understood. Feng Maching nodded slowly. Everyone looked at Feng Maching's slightly tired appearance and stood up to leave so that Feng Maching could rest well. Jingyu was still uneasy. Who was this girl who asked for directions? A local? She had an injury on her wrist? Jingyu really didn't remember. Did she know this person? Moreover, it was someone who knew goo poison. It was really too strange. Xiaochen and his men busied themselves while the imperial physician came to diagnose Jingyu. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with Jingyu, Xiaochen felt a little relieved. On the third day after Feng Maching woke up, Su Yu, who had received the news, rushed over. At the same time, she brought a very valuable piece of news. What did you say? Did your people see a lot of people entering Miaojiang? Come to the mainland? Jingyu's brows furrowed tightly as she turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling also furrowed her brows tightly. Yes, a lot of people from Miaojiang came. Looking at their posture, they didn't seem to have good intentions, so I sent people to follow them. However, the people from Miaojiang were extremely cunning. They drilled into the forest and then disappeared. I don't know where they escaped to, Su Yu said solemnly. However, I tracked down one of them. He came from a direction of this Tokyo. It was a man with a scar on his face. His appearance wasn't very clear, but if I see him again, I will be able to recognize him at a glance. Su Yu said with a frown. A man? Not a woman? Jingyu was slightly stunned and asked. Yes, a man. Su Yu nodded slowly. Looking at Jingyu's strange expression, she suddenly asked in confusion. What's wrong? Is there a problem? It's nothing. Jingyu slowly shook her head. Since the people from Miaojiang came in this direction, there must be a problem. Jingyu frowned deeply and turned to look at Su Yu. I will have to trouble you to help me keep an eye on what the people from Miaojiang want to do. Chapter 1821. I understand. Suyu nodded slowly, then asked, How is Feng watching now? Is there anything wrong with him? With Feng Ling here, he's still alive and well. Jingyu nodded calmly and said, I'm going to look for Xiao Chun. Feng watching is in the side courtyard. You can go and see him. Okay. Suyu nodded in response to Jingyu's words. Then, she got up and walked towards the side courtyard under the lead of the maidservant. This was the first time Suyu came to the prince's mansion. Looking at the scenery in the mansion, Suyu looked around curiously. She had been in the pugilistic world for a long time and met many people who always wanted to come to the imperial city and look at the scenery in the imperial city. Now, Suyu suddenly seemed to understand. This imperial city really made people linger and forget to return. Suyu narrowed her eyes slightly and turned to walk towards the side corridor. However, the moment she walked, she met an unexpected person. The man in black walked over with a white bandage wrapped around his wrist. There was no expression on his face as he walked over casually. With a glance, he saw Suyu, and Suyu also saw him. Who else could walk around casually in the prince's mansion other than Xingyi? Suyu stood in place and was slightly stunned. Her eyes were dyed with a layer of another color, as if she was afraid. She lowered her head slightly, as if she wanted to avoid him. However, this was only a corridor. She couldn't avoid him even if she wanted to. Xingyi stopped in his tracks. Suyu also stopped. I'm here to see Feng watching. Suyu was silent for a moment. Then she tilted her head and said. Xingyi looked at Suyu and waved slightly to the maidservant beside him. He turned and said, I'll take you there. No need, there's someone. Suyu wanted to say that there was someone who would take her there, but in the blink of an eye, she saw that the person who was originally leading the way turned and left. Suyu opened her mouth to call out, but the maidservant walked even faster. Suyu suddenly became anxious and glared at Xingyi. Who else could make this maidservant so obedient except for Xingyi? Let's go. Xingyi didn't say much, turned around, and walked forward. Although Suyu didn't want to leave, the Wangfu was so big and she wasn't familiar with it. It wasn't good for her to wander around. In desperation, she could only follow Xingyi's footsteps. With Xingyi leading the way, Suyu suddenly lost all interest in the exquisiteness of the Wangfu. She silently followed behind Xingyi and looked at Xingyi's tall body and his black robe, as usual. Looking at the black robe, Suyu suddenly fell into trance. In the past, Xingyi's clothes were not only black. At that time, Xingyi was in Jianghu. He was so handsome and confident. But now he had become so rigid. Wearing black clothes, he was so unapproachable. Suyu really didn't understand. Was it so easy to be a shadow guard? He could give up everything in the Jianghu and live a carefree life. But now he had to serve someone else. It was hard to understand. Suyu slightly lowered her head. Her eyes suddenly fell on Xingyi's wrist. The white gauze was somewhat dazzling. Suyu frowned slightly. She saw a little blood oozing out of Xingyi's wrist. After a moment of silence, she suddenly opened her mouth and said, Are you injured? I'm fine. Xingyi heard Suyu's words and hid his hand in his sleeve. He didn't seem to have much of an expression, but when Suyu saw Interrogation Officer 1's action, she frowned in dissatisfaction. She quickly took a few steps forward and grabbed Interrogation Officer 1's hand. She pulled up Interrogation Officer 1's sleeve. Looking at the blood that seeped out, Suyu was angry. Chapter 1822. The wound split open. Did you practice swordsmanship? Suyu looked up at Xingyi and said very unhappily. Interrogation Officer 1 looked at Suyu's hand that was holding his. That gaze filled with anger when she looked up at him was so familiar. Once upon a time, he would always see such a gaze from her when he was injured. He didn't expect to see it again after such a long time. You're injured and you still practice swordsmanship. Don't you want your hand? Suyu said with a cold face. Where is the medicine? Go and change the dressing. It's in front. Xingyi raised his hand and pointed in a direction. Suyu glared at Xingyi angrily and dragged Xingyi toward the courtyard. Her mouth was full of displeasure, and she was very unhappy as she rambled on. Xingyi silently followed behind Suyu and let Suyu pull his hand. His heart was beating fast. For some reason, Xing Yi suddenly thought that it would be good if this road could never be finished. But it was just a thought. Sit here and don't move. So you pushed Xing Yi into the room and turned to get the medicine box. Xing Yi sat in his seat and smiled slightly at Su Yu's movements. Then he seemed to think of something, and his face was slightly silent. Su Yu took the medicine and gauze and came over. She sat down beside Xing Yi and reached out to untie the blood-stained gauze. Looking at the cracked wound, she frowned fiercely. The wound on his wrist didn't look like it was caused by someone. Xing Yi, what did you do to yourself? Su Yu's eyes were full of shock. Looking at the bloody wound, she looked up at Xing Yi and said, I didn't do anything. Interrogation Officer 1 answered in silence. Then what happened to the wound? Su Yu frowned tightly. Don't tell me that you accidentally cut yourself. Su Yu squinted at Xing Yi and said, You cut yourself. Do you want to die? Xing, when did you become so cowardly? I'm cowardly? Xing Yi heard Su Yu's description and suddenly frowned fiercely. Su Yu, you can't possibly be thinking that this injury of mine is because of you, that I didn't want to live anymore and slit my wrist to commit suicide, right? Interrogation Officer 1 slowly moved closer to Su Yu and said with slightly narrowed eyes, Su Yu looked at Xing Yi's approach and swallowed silently and said, I didn't say anything, you are really. Xing Yi looked at Su Yu quietly. The two were so close that they seemed to be able to feel each other's breath. Su Yu felt uncomfortable all over. She tilted her head slightly and wanted to avoid Xing Yi when he got up. But Xing Yi pressed her down on the soft couch. The wound on her wrist split open again and bright red blood flowed onto Su Yu's hand. Su Yu's eyes were full of shock. She reached out and pushed Xing Yi, wanting to remind Xing Yi. But the moment she opened her mouth, Xing Yi leaned over and kissed her fiercely. Su Yu's eyes widened. She wanted to struggle, but didn't dare to. Thinking of Xing Yi's hand, if she struggled, he would definitely hold her even tighter. Blood was flowing, and the scorching kiss had an aura of facing death with equanimity. It was a kind of silent lingering. Su Yu was kissed until she was dizzy. Under heavy breathing, Xing Yi slowly straightened his body. His pair of dark eyes stared deeply at Su Yu. What do you mean by this? Su Yu looked at Xing Yi. The emotions in her pair of beautiful eyes were so scary. Chapter 1823. Can't you feel it? Xing Yi looked deeply at Su Yu and slowly let go of Su Yu. Then he stood up, raised his hand to take the gauze and medicine at the side, and strode out. Su Yu lay on a soft couch in a daze. Xing Yi's blood on her hand had coagulated. Only then did Su Yu slowly get up. Her whole body was emitting an indescribable anger. In the end, she suppressed this anger deeply, stood up, took the gauze at the side, and wiped the blood off her hand. She stepped out of the room and looked around. Just as she was about to walk outside, she suddenly saw the servant who was walking past. She quickly stopped the servant and asked where Feng Maching lived. When she learned that it was on the other side of the room, Su Yu hurriedly walked over. Feng Maching, you're not dead yet. Su Yu unceremoniously entered the room, but the moment she entered, she was immediately dumbfounded. On the bed, Feng Maching was lying on the bed in his underwear. His hand was holding Hellion Theo's hand, and Hellion Theo was lying on his body. This position was incomparably ambiguous, no matter from which angle. Hellion Theo, are you trying to murder Feng Maching? Su Yu stood silently for a while and said very hesitantly, I originally wanted to kill him, but now that you found out, do you think I can still do it? Hellion Theo's face alternated between red and white. He reached out and pushed Feng Maching away fiercely, snorted coldly, and turned to leave. Feng Maching's face was extremely ugly. After watching Hellion Theo leave, his gaze fell on Su Yu. What are you doing here? Feng Maching didn't know what was wrong with him, but his tone was terrible. Hey, how can you talk like that? Su Yu suddenly couldn't take it anymore. She looked at Feng Maching with disdain and said, If it weren't for me, you would have died at the hands of Hellion Theo just now. This lady came to see you with good intentions. Look at you, you don't welcome me? You didn't come earlier or later, but you came at this time. Feng Maching tilted his head and said, I won't die. Seeing that you're still so annoying, I know that you won't die. I'm relieved. So you nodded lightly. She looked at Feng Maching and said, I brought you some news. The person who injured you is from the Wind Lightning sect, an old friend of yours. So you narrowed her eyes and said, I heard that the sect leader of the Wind Lightning sect seems to like you a lot. Feng Maching immediately frowned. His eyes were filled with displeasure. Where is he? There's no need to doubt it. They're already rushing towards the Imperial City. Suyu casually shrugged and said, I can almost see it. In the future, the mansion will be turned upside down. I don't know if Xiao Chun will throw you out. You don't have to worry about that. Feng Maching closed his eyes slightly and said, I want to rest. You're really annoying. Suyu glared at Feng Maching with disdain. She turned and walked outside. Jingyu and Xiao Chun were resting in the room. Jingyu was eating while reading a book. Just as she was engrossed in reading, she heard the commotion in the courtyard. She immediately frowned. Yin Xiao hurriedly ran in. What's going on outside? Jingyu asked with a frown. Lord Shitzi and Miss Feng you are fighting. Yin Xiao's eyes were filled with anxiety as she said. Chapter 1824. Why can't these two stop when they see each other? Jingyu frowned. When Xiao Chun heard this, he smiled and said, This isn't a bad thing. Xiao Bai knows his limits and won't hurt Feng Yu. Feng Yu can't win against Xiao Bai either. You're really open-minded. Jingyu glared at Xiao Chun. Let them be. Xiao Chun smiled at Jingyu and said, You've been reading for so long. Go inside and have a good rest. Jingyu was speechless when she saw Xiao Chun's nonchalant attitude. However, she was still worried and asked Yin Xiao to keep an eye on the situation. If anything happened, she would immediately report to him. Then, she was dragged to bed by Xiao Chun. Outside, Xiao Bai and Feng Yu were fighting. Xiao Bai was suppressing Feng Yu in every aspect, but Feng Yu was incomparably unwilling to admit defeat. Just look at the way they chased each other and fought. This made Yin Xiao, who was watching from the side, wipe away her cold sweat. Finally, Xiao Bai had played enough and pressed Feng Yu to the side of the rockery, unable to move. Are you done playing? Xiao Bai said coldly. Xiao Bai, you bastard. Let go of me. Feng Yu couldn't move no matter how hard she struggled. She was furious and tried to struggle, but it didn't have any effect. So wild. Xiao Bai frowned and casually threw Feng Yu away. Feng Yu held her arm that was hurt and looked at Xiao Bai angrily. She was unwilling to admit defeat, which made Xiao Bai raise his eyebrows coldly. Play by yourself. I don't have time to play with you, Xiao Bai said and turned to leave. Feng Yu saw that Xiao Bai was going to leave after bullying her. She immediately felt a burst of anger and rushed toward Xiao Bai without thinking. Xiao Bai suddenly unsheathed the sword in his hand and pointed it at Feng Yu. When he turned his head to look at Feng Yu, his eyes were cold and impatient. Feng Yu, don't push your luck. The iciness in Feng Yu's words was so deep that Xiao Bai's impatient gaze was filled with displeasure. It was as if he was unwilling to look at Feng Yu. Feng Yu froze in place. He looked at Xiao Bai's impatient expression and the cold tip of his sword that was pointed at him. They had been fooling around for a long time, but Xiao Bai had never been serious. But today, looking at Xiao Bai's appearance, Feng Yu was completely shocked. Xiao Bai really hated her, right? Xiao Bai didn't even look at Feng Yu. He raised his hand and put away his sword. Then, he turned and left. Feng Yu looked at Xiao Bai's back. For a moment, she felt that Xiao Bai was so cold and distant. Feng Yu frowned and stood in place. When Yin Xiao saw that the two of them finally stopped fighting from afar, she instantly heaved a sigh of relief. No matter which one of them caused a ruckus, it would be disastrous. Feng Yu sat alone at the edge of the rockery. Feng Ling took in the entire scene. He stood in place and was silent for a while. Then, he walked towards Feng Yu. Feng Yu looked at the pair of shoes that appeared in front of her and pursed her lips slightly. Big Brother Ling. Even if she didn't raise her head, she knew who was standing in front of her. Where does it hurt? Feng Ling slowly squatted down and asked Feng Yu. It's nothing. Feng Yu lowered her head and didn't speak again. Why don't you say it? You don't even say that you're injured. Feng Ling reached out and lifted Feng Yu's hand. Her wrist was red and bruised. It was obvious that she had been hit. Feng Ling's eyes changed slightly, and he said, "Admit defeat. There's nothing weak about it." Chapter 1825. I don't like it. Feng Yu retracted her hand and said stubbornly, "Silly girl, how can anyone feel sorry for you?" Feng Ling helped Feng Yu up and said, "Let's go and apply some medicinal wine." Big brother Ling, does Xiao Bai really hate me? Feng Yu looked up at Feng Ling and asked. Feng Ling was silent for a moment, then looked down at Feng Yu and asked, "Why do you want him to like you?" I didn't want him to like me." Feng Yu's face suddenly turned red. "Then why do you care if he hates you or not?" After Feng Ling said this with a cold face, Feng Yu was stunned for a moment. Then she also lowered her head. Yes, since she didn't think he would like her, why should she care if he hated her or not? From the beginning, it was just her temper. After going against Xiao Bai for a long time, she became unscrupulous and thought that this person would always be like this. But now it seemed that this wasn't the case. Feng Yu silently lowered her head. "Xiao Yu, you've grown up. If you continue to be so willful, the one who will be hurt is still you." After Feng Ling helped Feng Yu apply the medicine, she said these words. Feng Yu froze in place, watching Feng Ling walk away. Suddenly, she felt very sad. Unknowingly, she had already passed the age of being willful. "Brother Ling, I know." Feng Yu slightly lowered her head. The night was deep, and everyone was sleeping soundly. Su Yu wandered around the palace. She didn't know if it was because this was the only path she knew, or if it was because her heart was thinking about that person, but she unconsciously walked to this place. Standing in the corridor, Su Yu suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her heart was slightly conflicted. Should she continue walking, or should she turn around and go back? Su Yu thought of the scene during the day, and her face suddenly became hot. She fiercely clenched her teeth and thought that she must go and beat Xingyi up. Thinking of this, Su Yu's footsteps once again walked forward. When she approached the entrance of the courtyard, she saw the person lying by the door vomiting. Su Yu recognized him at a glance. "Wasn't this Xingyi? What's wrong with you?" Su Yu quickly walked over and looked at Xingyi as he stood up shakily. The smell of alcohol was so strong that Su Yu instantly frowned when she smelled it. "You drank." Su Yu reached out to support Xingyi. When Xingyi heard Su Yu's voice, he turned his head and looked over. He frowned slightly when he saw Su Yu. He raised his hand to shake off Su Yu and walked forward. "Why are you drinking when you're injured?" Su Yu looked at Xingyi, who couldn't even walk steadily. She frowned and chased after him again. "It's none of your business." Xingyi seemed to be very angry and shook off Su Yu's hand. He lost his balance and was about to fall forward. Su Yu quickly stepped forward and grabbed Xingyi's hand. Her heart was filled with anger. Without saying a word, she dragged him into the room and threw him onto the bed. "Are you crazy?" Su Yu's face was red with anger. "You were like that during the day, and now you're telling me not to bother. Xingyi, do you know that you're really annoying?" Su Yu fiercely threw the towel on Xingyi's face and said. When Xingyi heard Su Yu's words, he suddenly laughed. He laughed so happily, but it made Su Yu frown even deeper. She stepped forward and raised her hand to wipe Xingyi's face with the towel. Chapter 1826. Su Yu cried out in surprise and wanted to crawl under the blanket. How could Interrogation Officer 1 give Su Yu this chance? He turned over and pressed her down. Under Su Yu's half-hearted resistance, they rolled over the bed sheets again. Perhaps it was because she had made a promise and opened her heart. Su Yu was so immersed in it. Xingyi only got up when the sun was high up in the sky. That open wound was harder to heal. Although Xingyi was very careful, it still split open. He had no choice but to bandage it again. While Su Yu was bathing in the water, Interrogation Officer 1 went to get Su Yu's clothes. Originally, Interrogation Officer 3 and Interrogation Officer 15 were curious as to why their boss hadn't woken up yet. They didn't expect to see Interrogation Officer 1, who was usually expressionless, beaming with joy when he got up. When he met Xingyi and the others, he even greeted them cheerfully, which made Xingyi and the others feel strange. But what was even stranger was that Xingyi actually went to get a set of women's clothes and even called a servant girl into the house to serve him. That's right, she went into his house. The maidservant went in for a long time before leaving with the bedsheets and clothes in her arms with a red face. This strange scene made Xing San, Xing Shiwu, and the others look at each other in dismay as a bold guess arose in their minds. Just as Xing Yi and Xing Yi were discussing whether to ask Xing Yi, they suddenly saw the door open. Xing Yi walked out, followed by a woman. How could they not be familiar with this woman? Wasn't this the palace lord of Constellation Palace, Su Yu? She came out of Xing Yi's house early in the morning. No matter how many excuses you have, you can't explain yourself. Xing Yi and Xing Yi looked at this scene with their mouths agape. We have a sister-in-law now, Xing Yi said quietly. Xing Yi's mouth twitched violently. He felt that this world was too strange. Su Yu also saw Xing Yi and Xing Yi. Their gazes were like searchlights, which made Su Yu blush even more. Cough, cough. Interrogation Officer 1's brows furrowed tightly, and he coughed in displeasure. Hello, sister-in-law. When Xing Yi and Xing Yi heard Xing Yi's cough, they immediately stood up straight and greeted her loudly. Su Yu was stunned. Her expression didn't change for a long time. Instead, she blushed even redder. She nodded slightly at Xing Yi and Xing Yi. In front of the courtyard door, Su Yu looked at Xing Yi's hand and said unhappily, You can't hold the sword anymore. Rest well. Okay. Xing nodded. Su. She looked to Xing Yi's. She showed off and said, She. Interrogation Officer 1 frowned slightly, but he had no choice but to agree. He reached out to hold Su Yu's hand and moved a little closer. Su Yu suddenly felt nervous and hurriedly took a step back. With a red face, she said, We're outside. Rest well. I'll take my leave first. Su Yu finished her sentence quickly and turned to leave. Xing Yi frowned unhappily. He thought to himself that he should have stayed a little longer in the house. When he turned around, he saw Xing Yi and Xing Yi's searchlight-like eyes. What do you want to ask? I'll give you 15 minutes to finish. Xing Yi crossed his arms and looked calmly at Xing Yi and Xing Yi. Chapter 1827. Big Brother. Was that Su Yu, the palace lord of Constellation Palace? Were you together last night? Was she the one who chased after you in the past? Now you've made up. Are you together? 15th Interrogation Officer seized the opportunity to ask questions. Xing Yi frowned slightly at 15th Interrogation Officer's questions. After a moment of silence, he nodded and replied, Yes, yes, yes. Just one yes. That's it. 15th Interrogation Officer was going crazy. He glared at Xing Yi and said, Big brother, don't you have anything to say? Does that mean we're going to have a sister-in-law soon? 15th Interrogation Officer was very excited. Xing Yi nodded slowly and replied again. 15th Interrogation Officer laughed unhappily, but 3rd Interrogation Officer's face didn't look too good. Big brother, 3rd Interrogation Officer was silent for a moment, then called out, Are you leaving the disciplinary guard too? Xing Yi looked at 3rd Interrogation Officer, slightly bowed his head, then went forward and pressed 3rd Interrogation Officer's shoulder, saying, You'll reach this step sooner or later. Don't think too much. Why can't I stay in the disciplinary guard after getting married? 3rd Interrogation Officer looked at Xing Yi in confusion and said, Second brother left just like that. Now big brother is leaving too. 3rd Interrogation Officer, you'll understand in the future. Xing Yi retracted his hand and said calmly, Although I'm not in the disciplinary guard, I'll be back at any time. I'm not leaving. You don't have to be like this. Take good care of Master and Madam in the future. 3rd Interrogation Officer understood Xing Yi's words, but he was very unhappy. He pursed his lips tightly and didn't say anything. Jingyu and Xiao Chun were really resting in the room. After the imperial physician went to check on phone watching, he turned around and checked on Jingyu's pulse to see if there was anything wrong with her. After the diagnosis, he found that Jingyu is very healthy, and so was the baby. I already said that the child is very healthy. You don't have to keep checking his pulse, Jingyu said to Xiao Chun helplessly as she watched the imperial physician leave. Just in case. Xiao Chun nodded calmly and said, As long as the child is healthy. Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun, who was completely unwilling to listen. Her lips twitched, but she turned her head helplessly. Just as she was about to say something, she heard a voice coming from outside. Yin Xiao came to report that Xing Yi was requesting an audience. Jingyu frowned slightly. Why did Xing Yi suddenly want to see her so formally? Could it be that there was some new development? Let him in. Xiaochen nodded slightly and called him in. Xing Yi stepped in and stood silently at the side. Then he suddenly knelt down and said in a very solemn voice, "Subordinate Xing Yi greets master and madam." Jingyu looked at Xing Yi's formal manner and sat up slightly. Her entire person also became serious. Xiaochen looked at Xing Yi and sat silently. He didn't say anything and didn't call for him to rise. "Xing Yi, have you made your decision?" Finally, when Jingyu couldn't take it anymore, Xiaochen asked calmly. "Yes, subordinate has made his decision," Xing Yi replied solemnly. Jingyu, who was listening at the side, was confused. What kind of riddle were these two playing? "All right, since you have made your decision, then you may leave." Xiaochen slowly lowered his head and said, "This king's words are still valid." "Thank you, master," Xing Yi said deeply. From today onwards, Xing Yi will officially retire from the disciplinary guards. "Thank you, master, for taking me in all these years." Chapter 1828. When Jingyu heard this, she finally understood what was going on. Instantly, she widened her eyes in shock and pursed her lips deeply. So, it was interrogation officer, one who wanted to withdraw from the guards. But why was that? "Xing Yi, where are you going after leaving the disciplinary guard?" Jingyu pursed her lips and asked. "To the Constellation Palace." Xing Yi raised his head slightly and looked at Xiaochen and Jingyu. He said, "Your subordinate is going to marry Suyu. When the time comes, I hope that master and madam can honor me with your presence." "I see." Jingyu came to a sudden realization. Beside her, Xiaochen's lips also curled up slightly. He looked at interrogation officer 1 calmly and said, "It's been so long, and you've finally achieved something. It's not easy. In my opinion, it's better to say that Xing Yi didn't manage to escape from Su Yu's evil clutches." Jingyu's eyes were tinged with a faint smile. "Xing Yi and Su Yu were on and off. You've been chasing me for so long, and now you've finally said it? Since you decided, then go. However, so you can't leave during this period of time. I'm afraid you guys will have to suffer for a while." Xiaochen pursed his lips and said, "Master, don't worry. Before we can guarantee the safety of madam and master, we won't leave. Besides, your subordinate needs time to prepare." Xing Yi nodded slowly. After saying a few more words, Xing Yi left. Looking at Xing Yi's departing figure, Jingyu's eyes were full of sighs. She curled her lips and said, "They're really all in pairs. Isn't it good?" Xiaochen leaned back slightly and said with narrowed eyes, "Of course it's good." Jingyu smiled and turned to look at Xiaochen. She said, "Is there any news about Little Potato in the past few days?" "There's no news about Little Potato, but there's news about Qingge." Xiaochen pursed his lips and said, "Maybe Qingge can bring us news about Little Potato." "Really? Where's Qingge now?" Jingyu's eyes lit up and she asked happily. "Qingge said that he's going to find someone. When he finds that person, he'll meet us at Tokyo." Xiaochen pursed his lips and said, "I reckon that the person that Qingge is looking for will take at least a month." After hearing Xiaochen's words, Jingyu lowered her head helplessly. It would be a year in a few months. Where was Little Potato? Jingyu sighed deeply and her eyes were full of longing. How'd a year pass so quickly? She wasn't even prepared yet. Was Little Potato cured? Was he healthy? In a year, Little Potato must have grown up a lot, right? Would he still recognize her as his mother? Jingyu thought about it and sat down worriedly. Her eyes were full of sorrow. Xiaochen knew what Jingyu was thinking. He reached out to hold Jingyu's hand and said, "Don't worry too much. Little Potato will be fine." "I hope so," Jingyu replied absent-mindedly. Then she stared out of the window in a daze. After interrogation, one finished talking to Xiaochen. He suddenly felt his whole body relax. For a moment, he wondered if all of this was just a dream. Why did it come true just when he was thinking about it? Xing Yi couldn't help but laugh. Looking at the familiar Wang mansion, he felt uncomfortable that he was about to leave. On the other side, Suyu had returned to her own room. She lay on the table and stared at the long sword in a daze. Thinking about what happened last night, thinking about Interrogation Officer 1, she blushed and buried her head in her arms. However, the smile on her lips could not be stopped. Chapter 1829. Everything was as illusory as a dream. If the long sword wasn't really in her arms, so you would really think that everything was a perfect dream that she created. Just as Suyu's imagination was running wild, there was movement outside. Suyu stood up and opened the door. Palace Master. Ling Yong stood in front of Suyu's door, covered in dust. Ling Yong, you're back. How is it? How is the information that I asked you to investigate? Suyu quickly stepped aside and let Ling Yong in. I found it. The man from Yaojiang is in the Imperial City. You probably noticed our investigation. Last night, he went out of the city and went up a mountain. This subordinate did not dare to alert the enemy, so I have been guarding at the foot of the mountain. Today I came back. Ling Yong said very deeply. Great. Let's go and tell the 9th Emperor's and the 9th Imperial concubine. Suyu nodded slowly, stood up, and walked towards Jingyu and Xiao Chen's room. Everyone was sitting in the room. Ling Yong repeated what he just said. After Jingyu and the others heard it, they suddenly became silent. Jingyu turned to look at Ling Yong and said, You said that the man from Yaojiang hid in the mountain. It shouldn't be a mountain. Xiao Chan shook his head slightly and said, On the mountain outside the city, there's a Taoist temple. It's just that this Taoist temple is very remote and there are few people. I guess that the man from Yaojiang is hiding there. According to Protector Ling's description, it should be that mountain. Xiao Chan turned to look at Ling Yong and said, Whether or not he's hiding there, I'll know when I take a look. Feng Ling said calmly, If the man from Yaojiang is hiding there, then he must have placed poison around. You can't go there easily. Protector Ling, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to lead the way tomorrow. I'll go and see what's going on. Feng Ling turned to look at Ling Yong and said, Okay. Ling Yong nodded slowly. Protector Ling, after the man from Yaojiang hid, did anyone suspicious go up the mountain? Jingyu was silent for a moment before asking. That's not true. Ling Yong slowly shook his head and said, Just like what the 9 Emperors said, this mountain is very remote. No one would be here. There are very few people passing by. I don't know how the people of Miaojiang found this place. That's true. Xiao Chun nodded slowly and said, If it weren't for the fact that Xing Yi told this king that there was a Taoist temple in the mountain, this king wouldn't have known. If that's the case, the person who found this place should be someone we know. Jingyu narrowed her eyes. If that's the case, it's obvious that someone from the Imperial City helped the people of Miaojiang and even pointed out a place where they could hide. Fang Ziqing narrowed his eyes and said, I haven't seen any strange people on the streets these few days. Ever since the Tokyo Imperial City became big, there are even more people coming and going in the Tokyo Imperial City. It's really not easy to find out who helped. Fang Ziqing said deeply. That's right. Jingyu also slowly nodded and said, If that's the case, Ziqing, why don't you go wait in the restaurant every day? I don't know why, but I have a strong feeling that this person will definitely show up in the restaurant. Okay. Fang Ziqing nodded slightly and said, After hearing about phone watching, I also thought that the chances of waiting in the restaurant would be higher. Chapter 1830. Jingyu nodded slowly, and everyone else nodded as well. After some discussion, they dispersed. Why did these people from Yaojiang appear at the Tokyo? It was really puzzling. Suyu and Ling Yong also walked back to their own courtyard. Suyu looked at Ling Yong, who didn't even have time to change his clothes, and said with a smile, It's been hard on you these past few days. Go back and have a good rest. Thank you for your concern, Palace Lord. Ling Yong nodded. Ling Yong and Suyu stayed in the same courtyard. When Suyu was carefully wiping Interrogation Officer 1's sword in the house, she heard a knock on the door. Hearing that it was Ling Yong's voice outside the door, she paused for a moment, then raised her voice to call him in. Palace Lord, have something to eat. Ling Yong walked in with a bowl of soup in his hands. When he walked in front of Suyu, he saw the long sword on the table. The moment he saw the long sword, Ling Yong was stunned. I told you to have a good rest. Why did you bring food? Suyu shook her head helplessly. She reached out and sheathed the long sword, then turned to look at Ling Yong. Palace lord, this sword. Ling Yong frowned slightly. How could he not recognize this sword? Oh, it's nothing. Suyu shook her head slightly and said, I'll announce it when I return to the Constellation Palace. Announce what? Ling Yong suddenly had a bad premonition. Just as Suyu was about to answer, there was another knock on the door. When Suyu turned to look, she saw Xing Yi walking in. Why are you here? Suyu was slightly stunned when she saw Xing Yi. Ling Yong didn't think twice and blocked Suyu's side. His eyes were filled with vigilance as he looked at Xing Yi. I'm here to change my dressing. Xing Yi glanced at Ling Yong. There was a hint of scrutiny in his eyes. I just applied the medicine this morning. I don't want to change it now. Suyu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This person came to find someone, but he couldn't come up with a better excuse. Suyu stared at Xing Yi and said, Don't even think about taking your sword back. You're not allowed to use it now. Got it. Interrogation Officer 1's gaze turned to Ling Yong. He nodded slowly and said, Guardian Ling, it's been a long time. Xing Yi, what are you doing here again? Ling Yong looked at Xing Yi with an unpleasant expression. Ling Yong, don't be rude. Suyu looked at Ling Yong and frowned. She pursed her lips slightly and said, You can leave now. I have something to say to Xing Yi. Palace Master. Ling Yong was anxious. Get down. Suyu frowned unhappily. Ling Yong was extremely unwilling, but he still silently retreated. When he closed the door, he looked at Xing Yi with an extremely cold gaze. Xing Yi smiled indifferently. Tell me, why did you suddenly come here? Suyu looked at Xing Yi faintly and asked, Your subordinate seems to dislike me. Xing Yi looked at the soup on the side and silently took a bite. Then, he nodded with satisfaction and said, This soup is very good. After saying that, Interrogation Officer 1 quietly drank the entire bowl of soup. Only then did he say very calmly, I'll get the kitchen to make you another bowl. Hey! Suyu looked at Xing Yi and suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said helplessly, Do you know that you're really childish? I know. Xing Yi calmly wiped the corner of his mouth. Then, he turned to look at Suyu and said, I'll be very unhappy to see my woman being coveted by another man, not to mention that this person is the protector who has been following you. Chapter 1831. When Suyu heard Xing Yi's words, she glared at Xing Yi and said, You are really direct. Did I say something wrong? Xing Yi asked Suyu calmly with raised eyebrows. If it weren't for your previous attitude, how could my subordinates treat you so badly? Suyu turned her head away and said unhappily, You deserve it. Xing Yi suddenly lowered his head in annoyance and said, If I knew you would be so determined, why would I refuse? At that time, life and death were not up to me. I didn't want to hold you back. Moreover, you and I were still young at that time. I just thought you were being impulsive. Xing Yi said very calmly, If I didn't see Master and Madam, if I didn't hear Madam's words, maybe I wouldn't try to take this step. When Suyu heard Xing Yi's words, she was silent. By saying this, are you telling me that if one day you're in danger again, you'll still choose to escape by yourself? Suyu stared at Interrogation Officer 1 and asked. Interrogation Officer 1 was stunned when he heard Suyu's words. I am here to tell you that I have already told Master that I have left the Xing guards. Now I am free. Xing Yi did not answer Suyu's question, but said such a sentence. It should have been a great thing, but when Suyu heard Xing Yi's words, she was silent. I know, Suyu calmly responded. Xing Yi looked at Suyu's appearance and reached out to hold Suyu's hand. Since I have decided to marry you, I will not leave you. Xing Yi said as he bent down slightly and kissed Suyu's forehead. He said, I almost missed you. How can I have the courage to let you go again? It's good that you know. When Suyu heard Xing Yi's words, her eyes were suddenly tinged with a faint smile. The two of them were intimate in the room for a long time. When the sky darkened, Xing Yi got up and left. Suyu went out to send him off. Looking at Xing Yi's departing figure, her eyes were full of gentleness. Palace Master. Ling Yong's voice came from behind. Suyu turned her head. This is the prince's residence. You don't have to stand guard here. The smile on Su Yu's face gradually disappeared. She looked coldly at Ling Yong and said, "Soon I will marry Xing Yi. In the future, he will also be half your master." Ling Yong's face suddenly changed, and his eyes were full of astonishment. "If you feel that it's inappropriate, then let Wan Qing serve you. You've been busy for so long, it's time to find a good girl and start a family." Su's face's words, "SSSSSS Yi-chun," it pierced deeply into his heart, causing his face to instantly turn snow white, without any color. "Palace Master, you know that Ling Yong said with a heart full of anxiety. "I know." Su Yu suddenly raised her voice and said, "But don't you know even better? There's never been a second person in my heart. Ling Yong, I don't want to say more. I don't want to say more. I don't want to break up with you." Su Yu's words were so clear. Even if Ling Yong had thousands of words in his heart, he couldn't say a single word. This subordinate has overstepped. Ling Yong slowly lowered his head and stood respectfully to the side. "You may leave," Su Yu replied coldly. She looked at Ling Yong's lonely figure disappearing into the night. Although she couldn't bear it, Su Yu understood that if she didn't make things clear now, it would be even harder to do so in the future. Chapter 1832. The next morning, Feng Ling and Ling Yong went out. Xiao Bai was returning from outside. Recently, Xiao Bai had been learning about the affairs of the imperial court and had begun to get involved in the affairs of the imperial court. His identity as the crown prince was gradually becoming known. Xiao Chun never said anything to teach him. No matter what it was, he let Xiao Bai handle himself. If it was right, he let Xiao Bai experience it himself. If it was wrong, he let Xiao Bai find a way to make up for it. As long as Xiao Bai didn't speak, Xiao Chun wouldn't say a word. However, Xiao Bai was stubborn and didn't ask for help. Although the father and son weren't biological, they looked really similar. 11. Are they going to the temple outside the city? Xiao Chun gave Xiao Bai the right to use the guards. Xiao Bai kept 11 by his side and could order him around at any time. "Yes, Crown Prince." 11 nodded slowly. The people from Yaojiang have been causing a lot of trouble in the residence recently. Xiao Bai frowned slightly and walked into the courtyard of the king's mansion. He saw Feng Yu walking towards him. Feng Yu also saw Xiao Bai and stopped in her tracks. Just as Feng Yu was about to speak, Xiao Bai turned and walked to the other side. "Let's go see father and mother first." "Yes, sir." 11th interrogation officer was slightly taken aback, but he bowed in response. Looking at Feng Yu, who was standing in place, he nodded slightly in greeting and then turned to chase after Xiao Bai. Feng Yu stood in place and clenched her fists slightly. Then, without doing anything, she turned and went out. The streets were bustling. Feng Yu walked on the street and looked at the bustling streets. Her head was slightly lowered. She was in a good mood today, but because she met Xiao Bai at the entrance of the mansion, her mood suddenly became gloomy. Just as Feng Yu was thinking about what to do, she was suddenly bumped into by someone. Feng Yu immediately exclaimed, "Do you have eyes?" Feng Yu was already in a bad mood. How could someone bump into her while she was walking on the streets? She became even angrier and shouted angrily at the person who bumped into her. The girl was dressed in plain clothes and was holding snacks in her hand. She seemed to be the same age as Feng Yu, but she couldn't be younger than 1 or 2 years. She frowned at Feng Yu and said, "I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't see anyone behind me." Humph. The corners of Feng Yu's mouth curled up in disdain. With a displeased expression, she said, "One look and I can tell you're a wild girl who hasn't seen the world." "You?" The little girl was very angry, but Feng Yu completely ignored her. She turned around and walked away. "Yin Yun." A call came from his side. The little girl turned around and saw a woman running over worriedly. She said, "Yin Yun, are you all right? There are a lot of carriages on this road. Don't run around by yourself." "Mother, I'm fine." Yin Yun smiled sweetly at the woman. This pair of mother and daughter were naturally Yin Tian's wife and Yuqing and daughter, Yin Yun. "It's good that you're fine. Your father is still waiting for us at the inn. Have you bought enough? If that's enough, let's go." And Yuqing patted Yin Yun's head and asked, "It's gone." Yin Yun looked at the food on the ground and said, "I bumped into someone and dropped it. I wanted to buy some for Dad. Let's go buy some more. Yun looked up at enrich and said, Okay, okay, okay. I know you're good to your father. Enrich smiled helplessly. Chapter 1833. Of course not. Yun is also good to Mother. Yun said with a smile. Fengyu walked to the door of the rich restaurant and curiously looked at the decoration in front of the door. When she walked in, a maid came forward to greet her and politely asked Fengyu what she wanted. She didn't look down on Fengyu because of her young age. Fengyu curiously looked at the strange names on the menu and ordered some things based on her own guesses. Then, she sat at the side and waited. She looked at the decoration in the restaurant and then looked at the people who were eating. Which one of them wasn't dressed decently and talked well? This restaurant was really famous and very special. Not to mention the food, just the service and decoration were already very surprising. When the food was served, the color of the food was moving and the smell was so enticing. Fengyu suddenly became hungry, but this thing looked a bit strange. This was the first time she really didn't dare to eat it. She silently looked at the table beside her and saw that these people were eating very happily. Fengyu silently picked up the food and ate it. Oh, delicious! Fengyu's eyes were full of light. After eating the first bite, she immediately began to eat big pieces. While she was eating happily, she suddenly saw a woman wearing a bamboo hat come in. Her clothes were very simple. Fengyu took a glance and then withdrew her gaze. Why is she wearing a veil in broad daylight? Although Fengyu thought in her heart, she didn't say much. Food was more important. While Fengyu was eating happily, she suddenly saw another person come in. But this time it was an acquaintance. Fengyu wanted to greet him, but she saw the person who came in slowly shaking his head at Fengyu. Wasn't this Feng Zicheng? Why didn't he let her greet him? Fengyu sat down again and looked around while eating. She looked at Feng Zicheng and didn't know why Feng Zicheng didn't let her talk to him. Could it be that there was someone suspicious in this restaurant? Fengyu's eyes darted around. Just as she was feeling curious, she saw the person walking into the restaurant. It was a smiling young lady wearing plain clothes. Beside her was a man and a woman. They were obviously the young lady's parents. When Fengyu saw the young lady, she was stunned. Isn't this the person who bumped into me on the street? She even had to follow her parents out for a meal. She was really spoiled. Fengyu turned her head away in disdain. Yin Tian held Yun's hand and said, The dishes in this restaurant are the best in Tokyo. Didn't Yun want to try it a long time ago? Are you satisfied now? You could try it now. Yes. Yun answered happily. When she walked towards Fengyu, she saw the table that Fengyu was sitting at. It was such a big table, but Fengyu was sitting alone and eating a pile of food. Yun frowned slightly. Thinking of Fengyu's attitude just now, she turned around and sat on the other side. There was a faint look of unhappiness in her eyes. What's wrong? And Yuqing raised her eyebrows and asked when she noticed the change in Yun. Nothing, Mother. I'm hungry. Yun said faintly and began to order food. While Fengyu was happily eating, Fengyu suddenly smelled a very familiar scent. Fengyu's hand suddenly stopped. She seemed to be continuing to eat, but her little nose was twitching. Clearly, she was trying to identify this scent. Chapter 1834. This smell was very special, but Fengyu could smell it clearly. Fengyu turned her head and saw a woman wearing a bamboo hat sitting at the side. There was only a cup of tea and a few plates of desserts on the table. She just sat there quietly, sipping her tea from time to time. When Fengyu saw this scene, her eyes turned slightly. She suddenly raised her hand and picked up the few plates of meat and vegetables on the table and placed them all on the girl's table. The girl wearing the bamboo hat frowned slightly. I see that you don't have anything else to eat. Since I'm eating alone, I'll treat you, Fengyu said with a smile and sat down beside the girl. No need, I'm not hungry. When the woman saw Fengyu suddenly approaching, she immediately moved slightly to the side with vigilance. However, she felt that her actions were too impolite or too deliberate, which made people feel strange. Moreover, this was only a child, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Thinking of this, the girl relaxed slightly. Big sister, it's okay. Fengyu said with a very innocent look, I'll treat you. You eat this. The girl frowned impatiently, but then she seemed to have thought of something. After slightly pursing her lips, she slowly reached out to pick up some food. The scar on her wrist was very obvious. Aya, big sister. Feng Yu suddenly exclaimed, causing the girl's expression to change slightly. Big sister, did someone bully you? What happened to your hand? Feng Yu said with a face full of heartache. She raised her hand and grabbed the girl's hand. The scar was so scary that the girl's body tensed up as if she was ready to kill someone at any time. It will help you blow on it, Feng Yu said as she carefully blew on it. From the looks of it, she didn't have any other intentions. When the girl saw Feng Yu like this, her other hand, hidden in her sleeve, slowly retracted. She looked at the little girl and slowly pulled her hand back. I was accidentally cut when I was practicing the sword. It's nothing. Wow, big sister knows how to practice the sword. So amazing, Feng Yu said with eyes full of excitement. I also want to learn. Big sister, can you teach me? Big sister, where do you live? I don't know where to go to play by myself. Can I go play with you? Feng Yu blinked and looked at the woman. The woman's expression changed slightly, and she said in a deep voice, I have something to do, so I'll be leaving first. Little sister, enjoy your meal. With that, the woman stood up and left in a hurry. Feng Yu sighed and said, why did she leave? So boring, I'm not eating anymore. Bill. Feng Yu willfully paid the money and then left, humming a little tune. Just as Feng Yu walked out, a man not far away silently put down the silver in his hand and followed her out. Yin Tian had been watching everything silently. When he saw this scene, he frowned deeply. Wait for me here. I'll be right back. Yin Tian said to Yuqing and Yun Yun before walking out. When he reached the door, he asked for the direction of the sealed jade and chased after it. In the dark alley, Feng Yu's eyes were filled with fear. She retreated step by step as she looked at the man in front of her and said, Who are you? What do you want? Go away. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.